parents abandoned their adopted son during the move. Days later, the new tenant finds him. Lucas had always sensed something was off. At 12 years old, he had developed a quiet, observant nature, shaped by years of learning how to read a room before speaking. Adopted at the age of 6 by the Millers, a seemingly warm couple from the quiet suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, Lucas had spent the last 6 years trying to be the perfect son. He followed rules, got good grades, kept his room tidy, and never caused trouble. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong. The Millers, David and Claire, had painted themselves as ideal parents. Church-going, community-oriented, always smiling. They posted cheerful family photos every holiday, praised Lucas's achievements at school, and signed up for every parent-teacher conference. But behind closed doors, the warmth often faded. Affection was transactional. Praise was rare. And in recent months, the silence had deepened. It started with whispers. Late-night conversations in their bedroom, doors closed. Lucas would press his ear against the wall and hear only fragments, words like deadline, papers, and once, unsettlingly, start fresh. Then came the boxes. One morning, Lucas woke to find cardboard scattered around the house. Claire said they were moving. New job, better house, she smiled. But something about her tone was brittle, rehearsed. Lucas asked where they were going, and David brushed it off. Not far, he said. You'll like it. Still, Lucas wasn't told much. He packed his belongings as instructed, clothes, books, his small collection of toy dinosaurs. But as the days passed, he noticed something strange. His boxes, carefully sealed and labeled, stayed in his room. While the rest of the house was gradually emptied, his things remained untouched. He asked about it once, but Claire waved it off with a vague excuse about delays in the truck schedule. Then came moving day. The house was hollow now, echoes bouncing off the walls. Lucas felt an invisible weight pressing on his chest. The front door stood open. Movers bustled in and out. The air was filled with the sound of tape ripping, boxes scraping, and voices calling out orders. Amid the chaos, Lucas stood by his bedroom doorway, gripping the straps of his backpack, waiting for someone to call his name. No one did. He wandered through the house. Every room was stripped bare. No more family photos on the mantel. No more scented candles on the kitchen counter. Just dust, corners, and emptiness. He caught sight of David once, talking to the driver of the moving truck, and started to approach. But before he could call out, Claire intercepted him with a quick, almost nervous hug. Go upstairs and wait, sweetie, she said softly, her eyes avoiding his. We're almost done here. Lucas obeyed. He climbed the stairs slowly, sensing something final in the tone of her voice. In the hallway upstairs, he paused. The doors to the bedrooms were wide open, revealing the bare bones of the life they were leaving behind. He stepped into his own room one last time. His boxes were still there, untouched. The sun had started to set when he heard the door shut downstairs. He rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds. The truck was pulling away. A lump rose in his throat. He ran downstairs. The front door was closed. The driveway was empty. He called out once, Mom? Then louder, Dad? Nothing. Silence. Lucas stood in the middle of the living room, the walls stretching high and empty around him, and tried to understand. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe they were coming back. He sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then another. Night fell, and the temperature dropped. He found a blanket in one of the hall closets and wrapped himself in it. Every sound made him flinch, the creak of the walls, the hum of the wind through the cracks in the windows. Eventually, cold and afraid, he crept into the storage closet beneath the stairs, the only place that still felt enclosed, sheltered. He curled up on the dusty floor, blanket wrapped tight around him, and shut his eyes. They wouldn't leave him. Not like this. They wouldn't. But even as he repeated the thought like a prayer, sleep claimed him. Alone. In the dark. In the middle of a house that no longer belonged to anyone. When Lucas woke, the air felt colder than it should have. The blanket he had curled up in the night before did little to fight off the chill seeping through the wooden floor of the storage closet. At first, he thought he had only dozed off for a few minutes, but the gray light bleeding through the thin crack under the door told him it was morning. He sat up slowly, his limbs stiff, his throat dry. A hollow silence pressed against his ears, the kind that filled a place when all signs of life had been stripped away. He pushed the door open and peeked out. The house was still empty. His footsteps echoed through the hall as he wandered into the kitchen. It was exactly as he had left it. No breakfast waiting, no sounds of cabinets opening, no Claire humming softly to herself as she brewed her morning coffee. Only the smell of dust and wood. He opened the refrigerator out of habit. The light inside flickered and died. It was nearly empty, only a half-empty jug of orange juice and a jar of mustard remained. The milk was gone. The bread was gone. Power, too, it seemed, was gone. Lucas stood still, trying to make sense of it. He whispered to himself, "They'll come back. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe it was a mistake." But deep down, something heavy had already begun to settle in his chest. He spent the day wandering the house, testing lights, opening drawers, trying to find signs that this was temporary. But the power had been cut. The tap water sputtered weakly, then stopped entirely. Only silence remained. He ate a small packet of dry crackers he found in the pantry and a stale granola bar that had slipped behind the cereal boxes. He chewed slowly, savoring every bite. There wasn't much else. By evening, his stomach ached from hunger, but it wasn't the worst part. It was the silence. The kind of silence that screamed in every corner. He called out again, not for them this time, but for anyone. "Hello?" His voice bounced back at him. The emptiness was complete. He grabbed a notebook from his backpack and began writing notes. "I'm here," he scribbled. "My name is Lucas. Please don't close the door. I live here. I didn't run away." He found a roll of tape and stuck the notes to the front door, the back door, the mailbox. He taped one to the window facing the street. No one came. That night, he didn't return to the storage closet. Instead, he lay on the living room floor, wrapped in his blanket, staring at the ceiling. He counted the seconds between each passing car outside. It didn't happen often. Maybe twice every hour. The world had moved on, but he was still here. The second day arrived without warning. The light through the window woke him again. His body ached in new places, and his mouth felt sticky and dry. He searched every cabinet and drawer in the kitchen. Found a half-full jar of peanut butter and a spoon. He ate it slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, but because he knew it wouldn't last. As the hours passed, fear began to bleed into something else. Confusion, maybe. Anger. His parents, no, the Millers, hadn't just left without saying goodbye. They had left him. No phone call. No note. No instructions. Not even a single box with his name on it in the truck. He wandered into their bedroom. It still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume. There was nothing left behind, no clothes, no photos, not even dust on the nightstands. It was like they had erased themselves from the space entirely. In the closet, he found a single wire hanger swinging slightly, like someone had yanked something from it in a hurry. Lucas sat down on the floor and pulled his knees to his chest. The walls around him felt enormous. He had always known the Millers weren't like the other parents. He had noticed how other kids got hugged, how they were told, "I love you," out loud, how their homes buzzed with something real. His had never been like that. But even knowing all that, he had never believed they were capable of this. As night fell again, Lucas tried to sleep, but his body wouldn't let him. Hunger gnawed at his insides, and the loneliness was beginning to take on a shape, something with teeth and a face. He remembered reading once about kids who got lost in the woods and how they left markings for others to follow. He wasn't in the woods, but it felt the same. So he tore more pages from his notebook and wrote again, "I am still here. My name is Lucas Miller. Please help me." He added his age. He taped them in new places, behind the mailbox lid, on the gate, even on the tree outside. In the dead of night, he heard something. A scratching noise outside the front door. He jumped up, heart pounding. He waited, listening. The sound came again, a rustling, then footsteps. He rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds. It was just a raccoon, dragging a trash bag someone had left by the curb. He sank to the floor. He wasn't afraid of the dark. Not really. But the dark without people, without life, was something else entirely. It made time stretch, made hours feel like days. He didn't cry. Not at first. But sometime during that second night, curled up against the front door, he broke. Silent tears soaked the sleeve of his hoodie. He didn't call out this time. He knew no one would answer. And still, part of him hoped. Maybe the Millers were coming back. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he had misunderstood. But when he looked again the next morning, and the sun rose on the third day, the truth was undeniable. The house was still empty. The food was nearly gone. The lights would not turn on. The water would not run. The blanket was thin. The silence was absolute. He pressed his hand against the cold windowpane and looked out at the quiet street, where houses stood in neat rows, their windows glowing with life. Inside, he was just a forgotten shadow in a house no one wanted anymore. By the morning of the third day, the air inside the house felt heavier than ever. Lucas's body was running on instinct now. He moved slowly, his thoughts blurred by a fog of exhaustion and hunger. He had eaten the last spoonful of peanut butter the night before. Now there was nothing left in the pantry but a dusty tin of baking soda and a bottle of vinegar. His stomach growled with an aching persistence, and even the idea of food felt distant, almost abstract. Lucas had stopped waiting for the sound of the front door opening. He no longer imagined the Millers walking in with tearful apologies or made-up stories to explain it all away. Those thoughts had died sometime in the middle of the second night. What replaced them was silence and a quiet calculation. How long could he last here without food or water? How many more nights could he sleep on the cold hardwood before his body gave out? But that morning brought something different. While crouched on the windowsill of the second floor, staring listlessly at the street below, Lucas saw a car pull up. Not the Miller's silver SUV. This was a dark blue sedan with Ohio plates and a dent on the rear passenger door. It parked slowly, cautiously, like its driver wasn't sure this was the right house. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He didn't move. The door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, thin, and wearing a gray hoodie over a white t-shirt. He looked young. Not a teenager, but not middle-aged either. Late 20s, maybe. He glanced around the neighborhood as if expecting someone to greet him. No one did. Then he opened the trunk and began pulling out bags. A suitcase. A microwave still in its box. A large duffel. Lucas ducked behind the curtains, heart pounding. Someone was moving in. He watched from the shadows as the man juggled his things to the porch, fumbled with a key, and let himself into the house. The door creaked, a sound Lucas hadn't heard since the Millers left. The stranger stepped inside, letting in a rush of sunlight, and set his bags on the floor. He didn't close the door immediately. Instead, he stood there for a moment, taking it all in, the emptiness, the silence, the thin layer of dust on the staircase banister. Lucas backed away from the window and tiptoed down the hall. His mind raced. He couldn't go downstairs, not yet. He didn't know who this man was. What if he called someone? What if he got angry? What if he thought Lucas was some kind of squatter or thief? He crept into the farthest bedroom and closed the door gently behind him. It wasn't safe yet. Downstairs, the man began walking through the house. Lucas could hear every step. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of plastic bags, the muffled hum of him speaking to himself. Then came the unmistakable sound of tape being ripped, boxes being opened. The kitchen cabinets creaked. The man muttered again, this time louder, something like, "No fridge? What the hell?" Lucas pressed his ear to the wall. The stranger wasn't angry, just confused. That didn't mean he was safe. Hours passed. Lucas stayed hidden, peeking occasionally through the crack in the door. From what he could gather, the man's name was Jake. He answered a few calls in speaker mode, mostly short conversations with people asking if he'd arrived or if he needed help unpacking. Each time, Jake brushed them off with a quick, "Nah, I got it," or "just getting settled in." No mention of finding anyone inside the house. He didn't know Lucas was there. But he would soon. As the sun began to dip again, Jake's movement slowed. Lucas heard him turning on music from his phone, soft, instrumental stuff, and opening drawers in search of kitchen utensils. Then something happened that made Lucas's stomach twist. A cupboard door slammed shut, followed by silence. Jake had found the empty food containers. Or worse, the taped notes Lucas had left in the kitchen. Lucas held his breath. But Jake didn't say anything. No alarmed phone calls. No panicked shouts. Just quiet footsteps moving from room to room. At one point, he even laughed softly to himself. Then came the sound of a plate being set on the counter. A cabinet closing. The faucet being tested. It sputtered, then hissed dryly. Lucas heard Jake sigh and mumble, "Figures." Later that evening, Lucas ventured out of the bedroom, creeping down the hall just far enough to see into the stairwell. The downstairs was dimly lit now, the glow from Jake's lamp casting soft light into the entryway. Jake wasn't in sight. Lucas's stomach twisted painfully. He had gone 2 days on almost nothing, and now he could smell food. Something warm, canned soup, maybe. His body screamed at him to move, but his mind screamed back. What if Jake called the police? What if they put him in a foster home? What if no one believed his story? He retreated into the shadows and waited. But later, close to midnight, the hunger became unbearable. Lucas stood at the top of the stairs, listening. He heard soft snoring from the living room. Jake had fallen asleep on the couch, it seemed. He crept down the stairs, slow and quiet as a whisper. His feet barely touched the ground. The kitchen light was off, but enough moonlight filtered in through the window to guide him. He opened the pantry. Nothing there but Jake's unopened grocery bags. He reached into one and pulled out a protein bar. He unwrapped it as silently as possible, hands trembling. He was halfway through eating it when a voice cut through the darkness. "Hey!" Lucas froze. The lamp flicked on. Jake stood at the threshold between the kitchen and the living room, groggy and blinking, his hoodie now tied around his waist. They stared at each other. Jake's brow furrowed, and his voice sharpened. "Who the hell are you?" Lucas didn't answer. His mouth was full, but even if it hadn't been, he didn't know what to say. His hands dropped to his sides. He looked smaller than ever, barefoot, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. Jake stepped closer. You're a kid," he said slowly, eyes scanning Lucas's face. "What are you doing here?" Lucas swallowed hard. I live here," he said, voice thin. Jake stopped in his tracks. "You live here?" Lucas nodded. Jake rubbed his face, trying to piece it together. "This house was empty when I got the keys. No one said anything about." "I didn't leave," Lucas interrupted, tears springing to his eyes. "They left me." Jake stared at him. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then something else, recognition, maybe. Something had just shifted. He looked down at the protein bar in Lucas's hand, then back at the boy's face. "Are you alone?" he asked quietly. Lucas nodded again. Jake ran a hand through his hair, glancing around the darkened kitchen. Okay, he said, slower now. Okay. We're gonna figure this out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for his phone. He opened a drawer, pulled out another protein bar, and handed it to Lucas. Sit down, Jake said, motioning to the stool by the counter. Eat. And then you're gonna tell me everything. Lucas didn't sit right away. The stool Jake had pointed to felt like a boundary, like stepping over a line from shadow into light. He stood frozen near the counter, one hand gripping the edge of it, the other holding the protein bar Jake had given him. It was unopened. He didn't know if he had permission to eat it or if accepting it meant something more permanent than he was ready for. Jake, still clearly half asleep but increasingly alert, stepped back a little to give Lucas space. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't touch his phone. He just leaned against the opposite counter, arms crossed, watching the boy in front of him with growing concern. The silence stretched. Finally, Lucas peeled the wrapper and took a bite, still standing. Jake let out a slow breath, like some invisible tension had been loosened. I'm Jake, he said quietly. I moved in today. I signed a lease. No one told me anyone was living here. I thought the place was empty. Lucas nodded slowly, chewing with hesitation. His mouth was dry. He swallowed hard and finally whispered, I didn't know anyone was coming. Jake looked around the kitchen, then back to Lucas. What's your name? There was a pause. Then, Lucas. Lucas, Jake repeated. He nodded, testing the name like it might unlock something. You said they left you? You mean, the people who used to live here? Lucas stared at the floor. Claire and David Miller. My adoptive parents. They moved out 3 days ago. Jake straightened. Wait. You're telling me they left and just didn't take you? Lucas looked up. His eyes were glassy but steady. I woke up and the house was empty. Jake shook his head slowly, trying to wrap his mind around what he was hearing. That's not. I mean, that can't be right. You're 12, 13 maybe? They wouldn't just leave a kid. That's not. I'm 12, Lucas interrupted, voice firmer now. They didn't forget me. They told me to wait upstairs. Then they left. Jake's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He paced once, back and forth in front of the counter, then stopped. You've been here since then? Alone? For 3 days? Lucas gave a small nod. I taped notes to the windows. I thought someone might see. No one did. Jake ran his hands through his hair again. Jesus. Lucas flinched a little at the curse, and Jake immediately softened his voice. I'm sorry, he said quickly. Not at you. Just. I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't they tell anyone? Why would they leave you here? Did something happen? Were they in trouble? Lucas shook his head. They just didn't want me anymore. The words were spoken so plainly it knocked the air out of Jake's lungs. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of his phone still charging on the kitchen counter. Okay, Jake said finally. Okay, listen. I don't know what's going on here. But I can't just leave you here, all right? This isn't normal. We need to call someone. The police, or child services. Someone who can. No, Lucas said suddenly, almost shouting. Jake blinked. No police, Lucas repeated, quieter now. Please. Don't call them. Jake tilted his head. Why not? Lucas didn't answer at first. He sat on the stool finally, small hands gripping the edge of the counter again. He looked much younger now, like sitting down had pulled all the tension out of his frame and left behind a scared child. I don't want to go back, he whispered. Back where? Lucas hesitated. To a home. A shelter. I know what happens. They say it's temporary. Then you get moved again. And again. You don't know whose house you'll end up in next. What they'll be like. How long you'll stay. Jake leaned in, elbows on the counter. But this, staying hidden in an empty house, this can't work either. Lucas stared at him. I wasn't trying to stay. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know anyone was coming. Jake exhaled slowly. He looked over his shoulder toward the living room. The lamp was still on. His mattress was still on the floor where he dropped it earlier that evening. He hadn't even unpacked the kitchen yet. This was supposed to be a new start for him too, a quieter place, away from the noise of the city, where he could finally clear his head. But now this. And yet, he couldn't ignore the look on Lucas's face. The quiet pleading. The exhaustion. The fear. I'm not going to throw you out, Jake said finally. But I can't promise I won't call someone. You're just a kid. You need help. Lucas stood up. If you call them, I'll run. Jake raised his hands slowly. All right. I hear you. Sit down. Please. Just talk to me. Tell me what happened. All of it. Lucas sat back down, this time not as tense. He finished the last bite of the protein bar and wiped his hands on his jeans. Then, after a long silence, he began to speak. He told Jake about the boxes he had packed that were never loaded. About Claire's voice when she told him to wait upstairs. About the fridge slowly emptying. About the moment he realized they weren't coming back. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just told it like it was, like a boy explaining something everyone else had missed. Jake listened without interrupting. When Lucas paused, Jake only asked a few careful questions. Did they leave you any money? No. Did they say anything weird before they left? About the future? No. They stopped talking to me a lot before that. Do you have anyone else? Family? Lucas shook his head. Just them. Jake nodded slowly. Okay. There was a beat of silence. I have an idea, Jake said. Just for tonight. You can stay here. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes. I'll make some calls, ask around, maybe, find a way to help without throwing you into some system that doesn't care. Lucas looked at him sharply. You do that? Jake shrugged. I don't know you yet, Lucas. But no kid deserves to be left behind like that. Lucas didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. Jake took it as a kind of acceptance. He stood, moved to one of the boxes he had left by the door, and pulled out a sleeping bag. He tossed it to Lucas gently. Pick a room. Anyone you want. I'll be here in the living room if you need something. Just, no locking doors, all right? Lucas caught the sleeping bag, nodded, and for the first time since Jake had walked in, he didn't look like he was ready to bolt at any second. Jake watched as Lucas disappeared up the stairs, the sleeping bag tucked under one arm, his footsteps slow but deliberate. He waited until the door to one of the rooms clicked shut, not locked, just closed, before turning off the kitchen light and collapsing back onto the couch. He stared at the ceiling. What the hell had he just stepped into? Jake didn't sleep much that night. Every sound from upstairs put him on edge, not out of fear, but responsibility. He kept expecting Lucas to run, to vanish the moment he let his guard down. But the house remained quiet. Just before dawn, Jake gave up trying to rest and moved to the kitchen. The overhead light still flickered when he turned it on. He poured water from a jug into a kettle and stood at the counter, arms crossed, watching it slowly come to a boil. By 7 o'clock in the morning, Lucas came down the stairs. He looked rough, pale, tired, his sweatshirt wrinkled and his hair a mess. But he came willingly. No panic. No bags packed. He hovered by the edge of the hallway, not stepping fully into the kitchen until Jake nodded at the stool again. I made tea, Jake said, pushing a mug across the counter. No food yet. Grocery store runs on my list. You like eggs? Lucas shrugged. Sure. Jake cracked 4 eggs into a pan without another word. They didn't talk until breakfast was over. Lucas ate everything, slowly but deliberately, and drank the tea down to the last drop. Only then did Jake open his laptop on the kitchen counter and say, "All right. Let's see what we're dealing with." He typed quickly, navigating to the state's public adoption and guardianship database. Lucas watched in silence. After a few minutes, Jake sat back, frowning. "I ran your name," he said. "There's a record of your adoption from 6 years ago. David and Claire Miller. Finalized through the county court system." Lucas nodded. "That's right. But here's the weird part," Jake continued, scrolling. "There's a new entry. Just over 2 months ago, there was a filing. Not from the Millers, from the state. It's like your status was changed." Lucas leaned forward. "Changed how?" Jake turned the screen so Lucas could see. "It says the adoption was legally vacated due to custodial irregularity. That's not normal. Adoptions don't just get reversed unless there's serious cause, abuse, fraud, or something illegal." Lucas stared at the screen, unblinking. "I didn't do anything." "I know," Jake said quickly. "I'm not saying you did. But someone filed something. This didn't happen by accident. And here's what's worse, as of now, according to the system, you don't have any legal guardians. It's like you're in limbo." Lucas looked away. "They must have done it. The Millers." Jake nodded slowly. "Possibly. But to undo an adoption, that takes legal action. Lawyers. Judges. This isn't something they could have handled in secret." Lucas stayed quiet. Jake opened another tab and began searching for the Millers. Social media, news archives, property databases. He tried Facebook first, nothing. Then LinkedIn, no trace of either Claire or David. Their profiles had either been deleted or heavily scrubbed. He checked the state's public records and found that their house had been sold 2 weeks earlier, cash transaction, no forwarding address listed. Strange. Next, he called the leasing agency that had handled the property. The woman who answered was polite, but clearly overwhelmed. "I'm not sure what to tell you," she said over the speakerphone. The Millers were model tenants. They said they were relocating for work. They didn't mention any children. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're saying they left no note, no belongings, nothing indicating they had a son?" "Not that I saw," she replied. "And we inspected the house before it was listed. It was empty." He ended the call politely, then turned to Lucas. "They erased you." Lucas didn't look surprised. "They've been trying for a while." Jake leaned forward. "Why? Do you know why they'd want to get rid of you?" Lucas hesitated. "They didn't love me. I don't think they ever did." Jake waited. Lucas picked at the edge of his sleeve. "At first, it was okay. They were nice. Took photos with me, brought me to events, smiled for everyone. But they never hugged me unless someone was watching. They never said they loved me. They started treating me like I was just something they had to manage." Jake frowned. "When did it start to change?" "After the 3rd year," Lucas replied. "They stopped going to my school things. Claire said I was getting too quiet. David said I needed to toughen up. Then they started leaving me home alone. Long weekends. No explanations." Jake looked down, thinking. "I think there's more to this. Something they're hiding." Lucas's voice dropped. "What happens now?" Jake closed the laptop. "Well, I can't pretend I didn't find that information. This is bigger than me. I have to report it." Lucas tensed. "I'm not calling the police," Jake added quickly. "But there's an agency for stuff like this, child welfare. They'll want to talk to you." Lucas shook his head. "They'll send me to a shelter." That's what always happens. And if no one takes me in again, I'll just keep bouncing around. Jake hesitated. I won't let that happen. But I can't leave it alone either. Lucas didn't respond. By noon, Jake had placed a call to Franklin County Children's Services. He didn't tell Lucas he was doing it, but Lucas seemed to sense it anyway. When the caseworker called back, Jake stepped into the hallway to answer. He kept his voice low. I have a situation. A boy, 12 years old. Says his adoptive parents left him. I found him in the house I just moved into. I ran his name. There's a strange update in the adoption system. I think you need to see it. The voice on the other end was calm, but firm. We'll send someone by this evening. Do not let the child leave. Jake glanced toward the kitchen, where Lucas was sitting silently, staring at the wall. He's scared, Jake said. If he thinks he's being taken away, he'll run. Then keep him calm. Let him talk. We'll come with identification and social workers. No police. Jake ended the call and returned to the kitchen. Lucas didn't ask who he spoke to. He just looked up and said, "They're coming?" Jake nodded. A caseworker. This evening. Lucas clenched his jaw. They're not coming to take you away, Jake added. Just to figure out what happened. I'll be here. I'll make sure they hear your side. Lucas didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, if I tell the truth, it won't matter. They'll put me somewhere else. Jake sat down across from him. You have my word, I won't let them just disappear you. Not like the Millers did. Lucas looked at him for a long time, his eyes measuring that promise, testing its weight. Then, quietly, he said, okay. At 5:30 in the evening, a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out, followed by a man carrying a leather folder. Jake opened the door before they knocked. Lucas stood in the hallway, hands at his sides, his body tense but not running. The woman smiled gently. Hello, Lucas. My name is Denise. This is Thomas. We're from the county. We'd like to talk with you, if that's all right. Lucas glanced at Jake, who gave a small nod. He stepped forward. The door closed behind them. The caseworker, Denise, closed the door gently behind her, her expression professional yet soft. Lucas stood just behind Jake in the hallway, posture rigid, heart pounding. He glanced at Jake's eyes, steady and protective, like a small lifeline in a world that had settled into dangerous uncertainty. Denise introduced Thomas, the man carrying the leather folder, as her partner on the case. They gestured toward the living room, where Jake had placed 2 armchairs facing each other. Lucas sat down hesitantly, as if uncertain of the ground beneath him. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. From the kitchen, he could hear Jake pacing, waiting for them to finish. Denise began softly. Lucas, our records show that you were adopted by David and Claire Miller 6 years ago, which they confirmed. But then the adoption was vacated by the state. Can you tell us what you remember about your life with them, and what happened here? Lucas nodded, fingers fidgeting on his jeans. He swallowed, then spoke, voice low but measured, as if he had practiced it in his head 100 times. They adopted me when I was 6. They weren't bad, at first. Took me to school events, bought me things I liked. But after a few years, I don't know exactly when, they stopped being parents. That's what it felt like. I was, not a person to them anymore. Thomas leaned forward in his chair, pen hovering over the open folder. That must have been very difficult. Lucas swallowed again, nodding without looking at them. It was. Then, recently, we packed to move. But they didn't move me. They told me to wait upstairs. Then they left. Jake watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded, silent support. Denise exchanged a glance with Thomas, then asked, Do you know where the Millers went? Did they leave you any explanation or letter? Lucas shook his head. Nothing. I thought maybe they forgot. But then I saw my boxes didn't get loaded. And when I came downstairs, they were gone." Thomas scribbled something in the folder. Denise asked Lucas a few more questions. Did he ever see the Millers receiving correspondence or talking in hushed tones? Did he know of any financial troubles or reasons they might cut ties? Lucas hesitated, then replied, "I don't know about their money. But I remember once hearing Claire say something about getting out before it all falls apart, and David saying, 'We can't keep doing this.' I thought they were talking about the house or a job." But his voice trailed off. Denise leaned forward. "Maybe they were talking about you." Lucas averted his eyes. After a few more gentle questions, Denise and Thomas stood up. Denise turned to Jake. "Jake, I'd like to see the envelope Lucas mentioned, the one his mother kept hidden." Lucas perked up, straightened in his chair, and Jake nodded and called him softly. "Lucas?" Lucas stood and followed Jake upstairs, nervously clasping his hands together. Jake led him to the small upstairs room Lucas had chosen. In the corner of the closet was a shoebox with old books and an envelope sticking out from underneath. Lucas opened it with trembling hands. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with tape. On it was written in cursive, "Lucas Miller, confidential." He handed it to Jake, who carried it downstairs with Lucas trailing quietly. Jake set it on the coffee table in front of Denise and Thomas. The three leaned over it. Denise retrieved a letter opener from her bag and carefully slit one end, then pulled out the contents, 2 folded sheets of typed paper and a photograph. Lucas watched them unfold the typewritten pages. Jake glanced at Lucas, then handed him the photograph. It was an old, faded shot of Claire holding Lucas in her arms, both smiling. But whoever took the photo had written, "For fraud file," in small letters across the corner. Lucas's breath caught. He placed the photograph inches from his face, then backed away in shock. Denise read aloud from the first page. "This boy is a convenient asset. Keep him out of public eye. Do not disclose his background. Utilize him for testimonials only. If he becomes an emotional burden, discretion is advised." She turned to Thomas, mouth pressed tight. He read the second page silently, his expression grim. When he looked up, his voice was low and controlled. "These documents appear to be part of an internal file. They imply that Lucas's adoption was less about love and more about public image. Claire and David treated him as a liability, not a son. And their plan, it seems, was to dispose of that liability when it didn't serve them anymore." Lucas's breathing was shallow. His eyes darted to Jake. Jake whispered, "Lucas. I'm so sorry." Denise closed the file and stood. "Thank you for bringing this. This is significant. It confirms our suspicions. This wasn't neglect, it was planned abandonment. We will include these in the investigation." She looked at Lucas, voice softer. "You did the right thing by holding on to these." Lucas nodded numbly. Thomas added, "We need to visit their old house and speak with neighbors or anyone who might know where the Millers disappeared to." Jake said, "I can help. I'll do whatever is needed." Denise turned back to Lucas. "We're going to make sure you're safe. We may have to find a temporary home for you, but we'll work to ensure it's a place where you're heard and cared for." Lucas drew in a deep breath. He looked at Jake, hesitated, then said quietly, "Can I stay here, for now? With him?" Denise gave a small smile. "That will be part of the plan. We just need to make sure it's documented and approved, but yes, having someone who cares around you is important." Relief washed through Lucas, but it was tempered by exhaustion. Everything had led to this moment of clarity, but also uncertainty. As evening fell again, Lucas retreated to his temporary bedroom, a mix of emotions swirling, betrayal, fear, but also something fragile and new, hope. He realized that for the first time since the Millers vanished, he wasn't completely alone in that house. Someone was on his side, and that made all the difference. The morning after the meeting with the caseworkers was strangely quiet. Lucas woke before Jake and sat for a long time on the edge of the mattress he had laid out in the upstairs room. Light filtered in through the dusty blinds, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the floorboards. The photograph of himself and Claire, the one with the words, "For fraud file," scribbled across it, lay face down on the bedside table. He hadn't been able to bring himself to throw it away. Downstairs, Jake stirred. The smell of coffee drifted upward, and Lucas, still barefoot, padded slowly toward the kitchen. Jake looked up as he entered, his expression cautious but warm. "Hey," Jake said. "I made oatmeal. It's not fancy, but it's hot." Lucas nodded. He sat at the counter and stirred his bowl in silence. A few minutes passed before either of them spoke. "I was thinking," Jake began carefully, "that if you ever feel ready, maybe we could talk more. About everything. No pressure. Just whenever you want." Lucas didn't answer right away. He took a bite, then said, "I've been thinking about it, too." Jake looked at him, waiting. "I don't remember a lot about my life before the Millers," Lucas said. "Just flashes. Faces. A woman with curly hair. A tiny apartment with stains on the walls. Loud voices. Then one day, a social worker showed up. They told me I'd be going to a real home. I was 6. I didn't know what that meant." He paused to take another bite, then continued. "When I first got to their house, everything felt like a movie. The kind where the kid finally gets rescued and everything turns out fine." Claire smiled a lot. "David bought me a toy drone the first week. They told people at church that adopting me was the best decision they'd ever made." Jake sipped his coffee and listened quietly. "But over time, it started to change. They stopped being interested in me. Not like they were angry, more like I didn't matter. I'd ask questions and they'd nod but not answer. They stopped calling me son. Claire just used my name, and only when she had to." Lucas's voice grew softer. "Sometimes I heard them fighting. Not shouting, just arguing in that cold way adults do when they're tired of pretending. I'd hear Claire say, 'This isn't worth the tax breaks anymore.' I didn't understand what that meant at first." Jake frowned. "Tax breaks?" Lucas nodded. "And things like, 'We're not running a charity.' I tried harder to be good after that. I cleaned the house, got better grades, stopped asking for things. But nothing changed. Then, a few months ago, I heard them say something about a new start. Claire said, 'He's too old now. It won't work with him.' And David said, 'We'll start the process again when we're in a better district.' That's when I knew." Jake set down his mug. "They were planning to adopt someone else. I think they already started," Lucas said. "Claire was getting emails on her laptop from an agency I'd never heard of. I saw one of the messages before she closed it. It said, 'Your initial application to adopt has been approved pending address confirmation.'" Jake leaned back. "So they were preparing a new adoption while simultaneously trying to cut ties with you." Lucas looked away. "Like I was a project they gave up on." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Outside, a mail truck drove past the window. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Lucas finally broke the silence again. "I used to think it was my fault. That I wasn't lovable or interesting enough. That if I had been more like other kids, louder, funnier, maybe, they would have kept me." Jake didn't interrupt. He just waited. "But it wasn't me," Lucas said, voice firmer now. "They used me. For attention. For image. Maybe even for money. But they never cared." He looked directly at Jake. "And I want to tell people. I want people to know what they did." Jake nodded, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "Okay. If that's what you want, we'll do it the right way. No rush. But we'll make sure your story is heard." Lucas blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means we go through proper channels. We document everything. We talk to someone trustworthy, a journalist, maybe. Someone who knows how to handle this without putting you in more danger. We make sure the Millers don't get to do this to anyone else." Lucas sat back. He didn't smile, but something in his posture softened. Later that afternoon, Jake made a few quiet calls. He had a friend, Carla, who worked in local media, someone he trusted. She agreed to meet at a neutral location and just listen. No cameras. No recordings. Just a conversation. They met at a small park the next day, under the shade of a maple tree. Carla brought a notebook but didn't write anything at first. She let Lucas speak. Jake sat beside him the whole time but said very little. Lucas told Carla what he had told Jake, the things Claire had said, the emails he had glimpsed, the way they had slowly erased him from their lives. Carla asked careful, respectful questions. When Lucas showed her the documents found in the envelope, she nodded and said, "This isn't just abandonment. It's fraud. Possibly criminal." She didn't promise anything, but she said she would start digging. That night, back at the house, Jake noticed that Lucas was quieter than usual, not withdrawn, just thoughtful. "Everything okay?" Jake asked as they sat on the porch. Lucas nodded. I didn't think anyone would ever listen." Jake gave him a sidelong glance. "Sometimes all it takes is one person. But now there are more." Lucas didn't reply, but he looked up at the stars, and for the first time since Jake had met him, he didn't look lost. Inside the house, Jake's phone buzzed. A message from Carla had arrived. "Jake, there's something you need to see. I searched for the Millers' adoption history. It's not their first child. There were at least 2 others before Lucas. Both returned to the state. One of them disappeared from the system entirely." Jake stared at the screen. Something bigger was happening. And they had only just scratched the surface. Later that evening, the house felt smaller, the silence heavier. Jake was hunched over his laptop in the living room, the screen casting everything into a cool glow. He had just read Carla's message about the Millers' previous adoptions, glimpses of disappearances, a history of children being returned and erased. A chill crept into his chest. Lucas sat on the opposite couch, tucked beneath a blanket, staring at the floor. He sensed something had changed. Once Carla discovered those other names, it was no longer just his story, it was a pattern. A dark, deliberate pattern. Jake closed the laptop and looked at Lucas, who lifted his head. "You know?" Lucas nodded. "I saw the message. 3 kids? That's not an accident." Jake exhaled slowly. "No. And she's digging deeper. But that could mean," he paused, voice trailing off. Lucas met his gaze. "I'm not sure I want to know how deep this goes." Jake rubbed his eyes. "This isn't safe anymore. If the Millers have a secret, they could be desperate." Just then, the porch light flickered. Lucas stiffened. The front door, which Jake usually kept locked without the deadbolt engaged, now felt vulnerable. A muffled knock sounded, soft, deliberate. Midnight time. The quiet of the neighborhood, usually undisturbed, made every sound loom. Jake gestured for Lucas to move away from the front as he stood up and approached the door. He peered through the peephole. A dark car idled at the curb, a black sedan with tinted windows. No headlights on. The engine thrummed quietly, too quiet for someone arriving by accident. Jake opened the door a crack, cautious. Through the slight gap, he heard a voice, low and unfamiliar. "You must leave. Before it's too late." A slip of paper was pressed through the crack. The voice continued, barely a whisper. "We're watching." Then the door shut firmly. Jake grabbed the note from the small foyer floor. In the dim light, he flicked open its single line. "Stop digging. Walk away." Jake crumpled the paper, tension coiling through him. Lucas, watching from the shadow of the stairwell, flinched when Jake's face darkened. What was that?" Lucas whispered. Jake shook his head, and for the first time, Lucas saw fear in him. Someone knows. Someone's warning us. He looked at the paper again, almost glowing in the dark. And it wasn't a neighbor. Not someone who cares. This is deliberate. Lucas slid down to the bottom step, voice shaking. Why? What could they gain? Jake sank to the couch again, paper in hand. I don't know yet. But it's enough. Enough to know, we need to be careful. They sat in silence for a long stretch. Outside, a single streetlight illuminated the front yard, and the car was gone. Finally, Lucas spoke again, quieter. What do we do now? Jake folded his hands on his lap. We keep going. But differently. More quietly. Carla's research can wait until it's safe. Right now, we make sure you're protected. Lucas nodded, eyes fixed on the page. I don't want to back down. I want people to know the truth. But, what if they come again? Jake reached out and took Lucas's hand. Then I'll be here. I'll protect you. We'll be smarter. His voice cracked, but he held it steady. We're not going to stop. But we'll slow down. We won't do this in the open world. We'll use our allies, people we know we can trust. Lucas exhaled, a shaky breath. Okay. They sat together, tension lacing the quiet, until dawn's first light crept in. The threat hung in the air, real and heavy, but they clung to a fragile thread of resolve. Somewhere beyond the walls of the house, forces were lurking, intent on keeping the Millers' secrets buried. But Lucas and Jake were not backing down. They just changed course. Waiting? Neither of them was, but maybe that was how they'd stay alive, by moving, by resisting, by turning fear into action. Lucas's hands were trembling when he woke the next morning, though not from the cold. The fear had planted itself deeper than he expected, taking root in his chest. All through the night, he'd watched shadows move outside his window, unsure if they were real or just tricks of the streetlights. Every time a car passed, his heart jumped. The warning had shaken him, and it hadn't been just a prank. Jake had seen the car. Heard the voice. Held the note. After breakfast, neither of them had the appetite to finish their food. Jake sat down beside Lucas in the living room, laptop open but untouched. He glanced at the boy and said, "There might be more. We need to find it." Lucas didn't ask what more meant. He already knew. The documents they had found, the adoption file, the photo, the phrases scribbled in the margins, those weren't everything. They couldn't be. The Millers had been too precise in their disappearance. If they were hiding something bigger, there had to be another piece of evidence, something more complete than what they'd already found. Then Lucas remembered something. A flash of memory. His adoptive mother had a place, off-limits, always locked, beneath the stairs in the old house. It wasn't the typical storage closet. It had a false back panel. He had only seen it open once, when Claire didn't know he was watching. He turned to Jake and said, "There's somewhere we didn't check." Jake looked at him, alert now. Where? The old house. There was a closet in the basement. Claire used to keep it locked. I think she was hiding something. Jake hesitated. You're sure it's still there? Lucas nodded. Unless they cleared it out. But it was built into the house. Not something easy to remove. By early afternoon, they were parked 2 blocks away from the old property. Jake didn't want to risk being seen too close to the house. The new owners hadn't officially moved in yet, according to the rental listing, but he knew they were cutting it close. This might be their only shot. Lucas had dressed in a dark hoodie, one of Jake's old jackets over it, and they made their way around the back fence, sticking to the shadows. Jake used a credit card to quietly slip open the lock on the back door, a technique he hadn't used since college but executed perfectly now. Inside, the house was colder than Lucas remembered. Stripped of all the furniture, it felt like a tomb. They crept through the empty kitchen and into the hallway. Lucas led Jake to the basement door. The stairs creaked as they descended into the dark. Jake switched on the flashlight on his phone. The concrete floor was littered with dust and a few old nails. The air was thick, musty. At the far end of the room stood the closet, just as Lucas had remembered it. Metal handle. No lock now. But the panel inside? That was the test. He stepped forward and gently opened the closet door. Inside, it looked empty. Just wooden shelves coated in cobwebs. But Lucas reached behind the lowest shelf and pressed on the panel. It moved. Loosened. Then clicked slightly out of place. Jake bent down to help him pull it out. Behind the panel was a hollow space no larger than a suitcase. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a thick manila envelope and a small black notebook. Jake handed the contents to Lucas. "This is it?" Lucas nodded, hands shaking again. They left quickly, slipping back through the alley, adrenaline pulsing as they returned to the car. Only when the house disappeared from view did they breathe freely. Back at Jake's, they sat side by side on the living room floor, the dossier spread out between them. The envelope contained over 20 pages, copies of letters, digital printouts, falsified medical evaluations, and most disturbingly, a list of names. Names of children. Lucas read the first few out loud. Mark T., age 5. Returned to foster care. No further record. Jasmine D., age 7. File closed. Terminated contact. Carlos W., age 8. Placed with family in Illinois. Returned 6 months later. Jake stared at the page. They weren't your first adoption. They were doing this for years. Lucas flipped through the pages. Some entries had amounts listed next to them, stipends, grant codes, tax incentives. The Millers had turned foster care and adoption into a profit scheme. Each child had been part of their pattern: adopt, collect benefits, keep the child long enough to justify the subsidies, and then find a way to return them quietly, if not erase them entirely. Then they reached a document marked, Emergency Filing, Lucas M. It was dated only 2 weeks before the move. It listed Lucas as a dependent no longer meeting household integration expectations. There was a recommendation for placement review that had never been processed. Instead, the adoption had been vacated under the radar. Jake sat back, staring at the papers. They filed a private request to undo the adoption. They used fabricated criteria. Probably used influence or bribery to push it through quietly. Lucas felt a wave of nausea. They were preparing to get rid of me the whole time. There was also a photograph inside the notebook, one neither of them recognized. It showed Claire standing with another child. A boy about 10 years old. Lucas had never seen him before. The photo was dated just 3 days after the Millers had moved. "Who is this?" Jake asked, frowning. Lucas shook his head. "Not a clue." Jake looked closer. "The timestamp, this means they were already meeting other kids before they even left you behind. They were replacing me." Jake's fists clenched. "They didn't just abandon you. They upgraded, in their minds. This kid's probably next." Lucas felt sick. He closed the notebook. "What now?" Jake stood, pacing. "Now we take this to Carla. Quietly. No emails, no digital trail. We hand it over in person. This is bigger than just fraud or abandonment. This is systemic abuse. They targeted vulnerable kids for profit. They left you, and others, behind like you were nothing." Lucas whispered, "We weren't nothing." Jake looked at him, eyes hard. "No. You weren't. You still aren't." That night, as Lucas tried to sleep, he clutched the notebook to his chest. He couldn't forget the faces of the kids he'd never met. Names now tied to his own fate. Somewhere out there, a new child was being welcomed into the same smiling nightmare he had just escaped from. He would not let it happen again. Jake didn't sleep at all. After he helped Lucas settle in for the night, he stayed up, sitting at the dining table surrounded by the documents they had recovered. He kept rereading the same 3 pages, the falsified medical reports, the subsidy records, and the list of children. Each time his eyes passed over a name, he felt a greater weight settle on his shoulders. Lucas had been the last in a long line. And there was no telling who might be next. By morning, Jake had made a decision. He wasn't waiting anymore. This couldn't be just an article. It had to be a public reckoning. He waited until 9 o'clock before calling Carla. Her voice was tight with fatigue, but she picked up on the first ring. "I found the rest," Jake said, skipping pleasantries. "The dossier. Their history. Everything." "Where?" she asked sharply. "Hidden at the old house." Lucas remembered a concealed panel. It was still there. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Meet me." "Not at the office. Somewhere quiet." They arranged to meet in a bookstore cafe downtown, a place with enough noise to be unnoticed and enough quiet to have a serious conversation. Jake left Lucas at home with a promise he'd be back in 2 hours. Lucas didn't like being alone anymore, but he understood. The meeting with Carla lasted less than an hour. She took photos of the documents, scanned the files into a protected drive, and swore she'd begin verifying every line. Jake watched her shift from friend to journalist, her focus sharpening with each detail he revealed. "This is going to explode," she said finally, tapping the dossier. "And they're going to fight back hard. Are you ready for that?" Jake didn't hesitate. "I don't care what happens to me. Just make sure they never get to do this again." By that evening, the first article was live. Carla published it under an anonymous byline to avoid backlash, titling it, "Adopted and Abandoned, Inside the Quiet Scheme of the Miller Family." It didn't take long to go viral. By midnight, local news stations were quoting from the piece. By morning, hashtags were trending. People began sharing their own stories of failed adoptions and child welfare neglect. Carla's exposé had struck a nerve. The following day, Jake's phone rang off the hook. Reporters, lawyers, even child advocacy groups wanted to speak with him or Lucas. He kept them at bay. Lucas wasn't a spectacle. He was a kid who had survived. Then came the knock. Jake opened the door to find 2 plainclothes detectives and a county investigator. They flashed badges and said they were assigned to the Miller case. Inside, they reviewed the documents again, this time through a legal lens. They asked Jake to recount how he had found Lucas. They asked Lucas if he was willing to speak on record. Lucas, surprisingly, agreed. Not just for himself, he wanted to help the other kids, the ones who hadn't escaped, who hadn't been heard. The interview took over an hour. Lucas stayed composed, though his voice wavered when he described the last day in the Miller house. Jake stayed by his side, only speaking when asked. The detectives left with the documents and copies of Carla's reporting, promising immediate action. For the first time, Jake believed them. By late afternoon, the authorities held a press conference. They confirmed the launch of a full-scale investigation into the Millers, who were now officially considered fugitives. Their faces appeared on television, in online articles, and on every digital billboard across Ohio. Claire and David Miller, wanted in connection to child welfare fraud and abandonment. Jake watched the news feed with Lucas by his side. Lucas's fingers curled into the sleeve of his sweatshirt. "They're going to run." "They already did," Jake replied. "Now the world's following." That evening, Jake received another call, this time from an unknown number. He considered not answering, but something in his gut told him he needed to. "Jake Monroe?" a voice asked. "Yes." "Who is this?" "I can't give my name. But I used to work for the same adoption agency the Millers used. I saw what they were doing, but no one listened to me. I have records. I can prove they manipulated the system." Jake sat up straight. "Where are you?" "Columbus. I don't trust anyone else." But your story? It's everywhere now. Meet me tomorrow. No police. Jake agreed, writing down the address and time. When he hung up, he looked over at Lucas. Lucas raised an eyebrow. More evidence? Someone from the agency. They want to talk. Lucas nodded slowly. Good. Let's keep going. But the sense of triumph was short-lived. That night, someone tried to break in. Jake was in the kitchen when he heard the sound, a soft rattle at the back door. He flicked the light on, and the sound stopped. But the doorknob bore fresh scratch marks. Someone had used a tool. A failed attempt. Jake checked every lock in the house. Lucas stood silently at the bottom of the stairs, watching his every move. Was it them? He asked. Jake didn't answer directly. We're moving you to a safe place. Just for a little while. I don't want to leave. Jake crouched in front of him. You won't be alone. But until they're caught, we can't take chances. Lucas nodded, jaw tight. Okay. But don't stop. Don't let this end. Jake promised him. Not until everyone knows what they did. Not until they answer for it. The next morning, Child Protective Services arranged temporary secure housing for Lucas, a monitored foster placement under direct supervision of the state. It wasn't permanent. It was protection. Jake made sure the family was vetted, kind, and trained for trauma care. Lucas packed quietly. Before he left, he handed Jake the black notebook. You keep it, he said. If anything happens, you keep going. Jake hugged him then, fierce and fast. Nothing's going to happen. I've got your back. Lucas nodded and climbed into the transport car. The doors closed. The engine started. Jake stood in the driveway and watched it disappear down the road. The war wasn't over. But the world had finally started paying attention. The days that followed Lucas's relocation unfolded like the unraveling of a long-concealed web. Carla's article had sparked the fire, but now the flames had caught dry branches across the state. Other journalists picked up the story, activists rallied, and former foster youth began sharing their own suspicions and half-remembered details about the Millers, many of which matched the patterns Jake and Lucas had exposed. Yet nothing struck harder than the voice of the former agency worker who had reached out to Jake with a promise, proof from the inside. Jake met the informant at a quiet, neutral co-working space in downtown Columbus. The woman arrived in a gray coat and sunglasses, nervously glancing around before sitting down. She looked exhausted, perhaps in her late 30s, but carried a kind of steely alertness in her posture. They paid off more than just a few people, she said after Jake confirmed his identity. Claire and David Miller weren't unique. They were just bolder. But what they pulled off? It wasn't possible without help. She handed Jake a flash drive. Internal memos. Reimbursements that were never cross-checked. Signed approval for post-adoption adjustment funding even after the children were returned. Some of the kids were never even logged properly into the system. And in Lucas's case? They used a backdoor clause reserved for unresolvable attachment failure. They built a case on paper to justify undoing the adoption. But none of it was ever verified. Not one home visit. No psychological assessment. Jake's throat went dry. How many others? She leaned forward. More than the list you found. The Millers cycled through at least 5 children, Lucas was the 6th. 2 of them disappeared from state records entirely. I tried to report it. But my manager told me to drop it or risk termination. The agency's contract depends on performance metrics. Finalized adoptions mean funding. Jake took a deep breath, the weight of the drive in his hands suddenly feeling immense. Are you willing to testify? The woman looked him dead in the eyes. If you promise to protect the kids? Yes. Jake nodded. That night, Carla published a second article, this time with names, internal memos, and a redacted version of the informant's testimony. It exploded. By morning, the state was under siege with questions from the media. A special committee was announced by the governor's office to investigate fraudulent practices in adoption agencies. The Millers were named directly. A national warrant was issued, and their faces appeared on federal databases. Meanwhile, Lucas was watching from his temporary foster placement, a modest but clean home with 2 women who had fostered before and understood the trauma etched into the quiet spaces of a child's day. They didn't pressure him to talk. They simply gave him space and structure. A warm meal. A routine. Jake visited every few days, always bringing updates. On the 4th visit, he brought news that stopped Lucas mid-bite during breakfast. They found one of the Miller's former placements, Jake said. Her name is Jasmine. She's 17 now. She was removed from their home 9 years ago and never knew why. But she's alive, and she remembers everything. Lucas lowered his fork. She remembers them? Jake nodded. Every lie. Every silence. Every time they pulled her out of school without explanation. She was shipped back into the system like luggage, with no warning. Her case file was scrubbed. But she's speaking to investigators now. Lucas leaned back in his chair. So I'm not the only one. You were never the only one. That same week, the Millers' bank records were leaked by an anonymous source. Payments traced from state subsidies, redirected into shell accounts, then moved again to offshore holdings. The FBI stepped in. The case was no longer just abandonment, it was fraud, endangerment, and conspiracy. Jake sat through multiple interviews, not just with journalists but state attorneys, federal agents, and lawmakers. Each time, he recounted the day he moved into the house. The dirty plate on the counter. The creaking upstairs floor. The moment Lucas appeared in the kitchen. It had started as coincidence, but now it was something far larger, something systemic. Lucas, for his part, had begun to open up to his foster mothers. He drew again, something he hadn't done since he was 9. The first drawing he taped to the fridge was simple, 2 hands reaching for each other in the dark. He hadn't titled it. He didn't need to. Then came the school invitation. A local middle school agreed to enroll Lucas quietly, under an alias, just until things calmed down. His first day, he barely spoke. But a boy in his science class passed him a note that read, "You're the kid from the article, right?" Lucas panicked at first, unsure how the truth had followed him. But the boy continued, "What they did to you was wrong. If you need a lab partner, I'm decent." Lucas didn't respond with words. But in their next lab experiment, he pulled his stool next to the boy's. Word kept spreading. Weeks later, Carla's reporting was nominated for a National Journalism Award. The article had inspired a wave of legislation in 3 states, including a proposed bill in Ohio to enforce stricter background checks for adoptive families and require randomized audits of post-adoption placements. Jake and Lucas were invited to testify at the first committee hearing. At the Capitol, Lucas sat at a long table beside Jake and a child advocacy lawyer. He wore a navy button-up shirt and black jeans. His voice trembled at first, but when he started reading from a prepared statement, the room fell still. "My name is Lucas. I was adopted by the Millers when I was 6. They left me when I was 12. They pretended to be a family, but I was just a part of their system. I don't want other kids to grow up thinking love is something you earn by being quiet or perfect. I want the system to see us." The final line echoed in the room. Jake, seated beside him, felt something loosen in his chest, pride, grief, rage, all tangled into one quiet breath. As they exited the hearing, several people approached, reporters, social workers, even other kids. One girl, no older than Lucas, whispered, "Thank you." Lucas didn't answer. He just nodded. Outside, standing on the Capitol steps, he turned to Jake. "Do you think it's over?" Jake shook his head. "No. But the worst of the hiding? That part is done." Lucas looked out over the city. For the first time in years, the silence around his story had been broken. The wind had changed. Not just outside, where the early signs of fall were settling into the trees along the quiet Columbus streets, but inside Lucas, too. He felt it in the way he walked into the foster home after school, less like a guest in someone else's life and more like someone reclaiming his own. It wasn't peace yet, not even close. But something had started to heal, like a joint that had been dislocated finally returning to its socket. Painful, but necessary. 3 weeks had passed since Lucas testified at the state committee hearing. The media storm had calmed, not because interest had faded, but because action had finally taken its place. The Millers were still fugitives, but with federal pressure and digital surveillance closing in, their capture felt inevitable. More damning records had surfaced in the wake of Lucas's testimony, files recovered from old servers, communications between Claire Miller and agency contacts, even photos showing other children being paraded for donors and adoption events. Jake kept Lucas updated. They spoke every night, a ritual now. Jake would call, and Lucas would answer on the second ring, always from his room. The conversation was never rushed. Jake had a way of listening that didn't feel like waiting to speak. "How was school?" Jake asked one Thursday evening. Lucas sat at his desk, a worksheet on U.S. history half complete in front of him. "Better. I talked more today. We did group work." "That's progress," Jake said. "Yeah. It felt normal. And weird. But good." Lucas hesitated before continuing. "They asked me today if I wanted to stay with this family. Like, permanently." Jake was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "I told them I needed time." "That's fair." Lucas tapped his pencil against the desk. "But it's not because they're bad. They're good. Really good. But I think I want to stay with you." Jake's silence this time felt different. He was still processing. Lucas filled it quickly. "I know it's a big thing. And you don't have to say yes. It's just that I feel safer with you than with anyone. You didn't have to help me, but you did. You saw me when no one else did. And I want to be part of your life. For real." Jake let out a breath. "Lucas, I've thought about this every day since I met you. I didn't want to pressure you. I didn't want to ask before you were ready. But yes, I want you in my life, too. If this is what you want, we'll make it happen. I'll start the process." Lucas felt something unfamiliar then. A warmth he hadn't felt in years, safety that wasn't situational but structural. Like someone had finally told the architect of his life to stop building temporary walls and lay a real foundation. The legal process began the next week. Jake filed a formal petition to become Lucas's legal guardian, with the intention of adopting him as soon as the system allowed. Because of the publicity and the special circumstances of the case, the court fast-tracked their assessment, assigning a caseworker already familiar with Lucas's testimony and the risks he had taken to expose the Millers. Lucas returned home permanently 2 weeks later. It wasn't a cinematic moment. There was no ribbon cutting, no dramatic reunion. Just Jake waiting in the driveway, arms crossed, pretending not to look as nervous as he was. Lucas stepped out of the transport car with his backpack and a cardboard box full of books. He looked up at the house, now their house, and exhaled. Jake stepped forward. "Welcome home." Lucas didn't smile, not at first. He just said, "It feels like I never left. But also like I'm finally coming back." They spent that first weekend reorganizing the place. Jake cleared out a room entirely and let Lucas design it from scratch. They bought paint, argued over shades of blue, settled on a darker tone, and laughed when they both realized neither of them knew how to paint a wall properly. The room took 2 days to finish. When it was done, Lucas stood in the doorway and whispered, "It's mine now." In therapy sessions, Lucas began confronting deeper truths. About the guilt he carried. About the way he had tried to earn affection that was never really there. About the anger that would wake him up at night, not because he missed the Millers, but because he once thought their rejection meant he didn't matter. Jake sat in on one of the sessions, and the therapist asked him what made him stay, what made him take in a stranger. Jake answered simply, because no one should wake up one day and realize they were disposable. Not a child. Not ever. And because when I saw him, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone worth fighting for. Lucas didn't respond right away, but the therapist noticed the way his body relaxed. That winter, Lucas spoke at a fundraiser for the Child Advocacy Center that had helped him. He stood in front of a crowd of donors, lawmakers, and educators, holding a speech printed on 3 crumpled pages. He said, "I was left behind. But that's not the most important part. The important part is that someone came back for me. And now, I'm not just someone's cause. I'm someone's son." He didn't look at Jake when he said it. He didn't need to. Afterward, people lined up to thank him. Some asked for photos. A few shared stories of their own. Lucas listened to all of them. He didn't shrink from the attention anymore. At home that night, as snow began to fall gently outside the windows, Lucas sat beside Jake on the couch. "Do you think they'll ever catch them?" Lucas asked. "They will," Jake said. "Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they won't stay hidden forever." Lucas leaned back. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Jake looked at him. "You don't have to be. You're not alone. Not now. Not ever again." Lucas nodded, eyes drifting toward the window. The snow kept falling. The world outside was quiet, for once not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt like peace was possible. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know how long healing would take. But for the first time, he was beginning to believe in it. The adoption was finalized in early spring. There was no courtroom ceremony. No photographers. No confetti. Just a quiet hearing held over a secure video link, a judge whose voice was steady and kind, and Jake and Lucas sitting side by side at the kitchen table, their laptop propped up between them. Lucas wore a collared shirt Jake had bought him just a week before. Jake wore the same sweater he'd had on the day Lucas had first appeared in his kitchen. When the judge asked Lucas if he wished to proceed with the adoption, Lucas answered without hesitation, "Yes, sir. I want this." The gavel came down a minute later. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo through a hall. But to Lucas, it felt louder than anything he had heard in years. Jake turned to him as the screen blinked off. "It's done. You're officially mine." Lucas blinked hard, not ready for the way those words landed. "And you're mine, too." That night, Jake cooked dinner, actual dinner, not just quick pasta or frozen leftovers. He made roasted chicken with mashed potatoes and vegetables, something his own father used to make on the few good nights they had. They ate in the backyard under a canopy of string lights Jake had hung months ago but never lit until now. The night was cool, the stars low and clear. Lucas looked around as he chewed. "This is what it's supposed to be like, huh?" Jake tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Just quiet. Real. Like I don't have to guess what's coming." Jake leaned back in his chair. "You don't. This is it. No more pretending. No more disappearing acts." The changes in Lucas had come gradually, then suddenly. His therapist once described it to Jake as emotional reintegration, the moment when a child stopped bracing for the next blow and started believing they were safe. It wasn't about perfection or constant happiness. It was about the absence of fear. Lucas began sleeping through the night. He started leaving his bedroom door open, just a crack. He no longer flinched when someone knocked. He smiled more, even if the smiles were still cautious and guarded. At school, his teachers noticed. He was participating more in class. He had even joined the after-school robotics club, where he met a boy named Elijah who shared his love of puzzles and old video game emulators. They started trading comic books and lunch items. When Jake asked him about Elijah, Lucas shrugged and said, "He's cool. He doesn't ask weird questions." Jake smiled. Sounds like a good friend. The story of the Millers eventually faded from the headlines. After nearly 4 months of being on the run, they were captured during a routine traffic stop in Missouri, traveling under false identities. Claire had altered her appearance with dyed hair and cosmetic glasses. David was carrying a fake driver's license and a laptop filled with encrypted financial files. The news broke quietly. Jake and Lucas watched the coverage on the evening news, a small blip beneath the day's larger headlines. Lucas didn't react much. He just nodded and said, "Good." The next day, Lucas wrote a letter, not to the Millers, but to the prosecutor handling their case. It was short, clear, and without malice. "They took years from me. But I'm not giving them any more. Do what you need to do. Just don't let them do it to anyone else." The prosecutor replied with a handwritten note thanking him for his courage. By summer, Lucas was living like any other 13-year-old. He and Jake took a weekend road trip to Hocking Hills, where they hiked, grilled hot dogs over a campfire, and slept in a tent that barely fit the two of them. Lucas kept trying to light the fire with a magnesium stick he had seen on YouTube, while Jake insisted on using a lighter. They compromised, failing at both before finding dry matches. That night, under a sky so full of stars it looked like static, Jake asked, "If you could live anywhere, I mean anywhere in the world, where would it be?" Lucas thought for a while. "I don't think I care where. Just as long as I know it's mine." "You mean home?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah. But not a place. A feeling." Jake looked at him, and for a moment, didn't say anything. "I think that's the best answer you could have given." Toward the end of summer, a non-profit that worked with foster and adopted youth invited Lucas to speak at a community event. He hesitated at first. Public speaking still felt too exposed, too risky. But Jake reminded him that he didn't owe anyone anything, and that he could walk away if he wanted to. But Lucas didn't walk away. He stood on a small stage in front of 50 or so people and told his story, not the whole thing, not the darkest parts, but enough to help people understand. He spoke of being left behind. Of being found. Of how healing doesn't always come in loud, obvious ways. "I thought family was supposed to be something you're given," he said near the end of his talk. "But I learned that it's something you build. Slowly. Carefully. Brick by brick. And sometimes, it starts with a knock in the middle of the night, and someone saying, 'Who are you?' when they find you stealing protein bars." The crowd laughed. Jake, standing off to the side, didn't even try to hide his tears. Afterward, a local reporter asked if he could quote Lucas's last line. Lucas said yes. The quote ended up on the nonprofit's website. It was printed on posters and shirts for youth events. A state senator even referenced it in a speech about reforming the adoption process. Lucas didn't care much about all that. What mattered most was what came after, when a boy approached him in the hallway of the event space and said, "I was adopted, too. But I think maybe it's okay to talk about the bad parts now." Lucas didn't say anything. He just sat down next to the boy, and they shared a soda while the room emptied out. That night, back home, Lucas crawled into bed, pulled the covers up to his chin, and stared at the ceiling. Jake passed by the door, paused, and asked, "You good?" Lucas nodded. "I'm good." Jake smiled. "Sleep well, kiddo." Lucas waited until he heard Jake's footsteps fade, then whispered into the dark, just for himself, "I'm home."